everybody, JP here. And if you've been following my videos, in particular the Load Studio Notes video from a few weeks ago, you know that we went over some diagrams that were included in that Load Deluxe box set of some of the drum miking, particularly the toms. There were some really interesting things going on with the toms. Different mics used on the rack toms versus the floor toms, and we saw the addition of a U87 kind of in between the two pairs of toms, sort of like, you know, one U87 in between the two rack toms and another one in between the two floors. And I was really curious about all this. So I called up my neighbor, Drew, fantastic drummer, Drew Majewski. I've mentioned him in other videos here. I actually borrowed that gigantic Ludwig snare drum for our snare reamp video. I borrowed that from him a month or two ago. But anyhow, I reached out to him to see if he'd be into trying something like this, and yeah, he was all about it. So he brought over 14-inch and 16-inch floor toms from one of his kits, and we kind of went crazy just trying out different things, and a lot of fun, very revealing too. I thought it was really interesting stuff from an engineering perspective. So just to go over what you're going to hear, we're going to start off, I kind of focused on the 16-inch floor tom, and we added the 14 later on for some stuff. First, you're going to hear the 421 on top and the 57 on the bottom, and they were recorded individually through my AML Neve 1058 mic preamps. No EQ. The only difference there was I flipped the phase on the bottom, 57. And I should make a point, anytime you're doing this, it does matter which mic you flip the phase on, because when you're making up a whole drum kit, you always want it to be the underneath mics, because the majority of mics on a drum kit are going to be facing down. And so you want to flip the phase of the mics that are going to be coming from the opposite direction. Underneath snare, underneath toms. Kick you can kind of leave on its own because, you know, they're kind of isolated in there, so you don't have to worry too much about that. And then room mics are a whole other thing that maybe we'll get to some other time. But anyway, yeah, we're going to listen to the 421 on the top of the 16-inch floor and the 57 on the bottom individually. Then we're going to hear them both combined through a Y cable. This is a Y cable that I soldered one end of to be the opposite of the other. I reversed pins 2 and 3 on one of the XLRs. And this is just like a $15 Y cable that you can get on Amazon. And if you're not comfortable soldering, you could always pick up a little adapter, a phase flip adapter. Whirlwind makes them. I think Hosa probably makes them. That's probably the easiest way to do that. Then we're going to listen to those same mics combined through our Whirlwind Impedance Combiner. This is a box that I've had for about 25 years. I actually have a couple of them, and I like to use them with mics on guitar amps. This is the first time I've tried it for this purpose, and I really like the way it sounds. There's a subtle difference there. Then we're going to try the Bob Rock trick that he has talked about of putting a piece of plywood directly underneath floor toms. And this really helps balancing them with rack toms, because rack toms are sitting on top of a kick drum. So they don't have the carpet directly below them. You know, they're getting some resonance from the kick drum shell below it. So this sort of approximates that for a floor tom. I think you will notice the difference there. Then we're going to listen to each drum with two other microphones. We're going to have a Sennheiser 609 on the top and a 421 on the bottom, along with the 421 on top and 57 on the bottom. We're going to do a little A-B, and we're going to do that on the 14-inch and the 16-inch. And on the Metallica sessions, we know they used a Sennheiser 409 on top. The 609 is sort of the modern version of that. They don't make the 409 anymore for various reasons. The 609 is kind of the closest you can get to it out of anything they make nowadays. Then, finally, we're going to hear both drums together with that third mic. Bob and Randy used a U87. We're going to use a SuperDeluxe U195 because that's the closest thing I have to a U87 here. And that was a lot of fun. I'd never done that before. I was really curious what it was going to sound like. And yeah, actually, you already heard it in the intro, but we're going to get into it a little deeper later. So let's listen to these individual. So that's your 421 on top of the 16 going through the Neve. And then the 57 on the bottom. So So that's what that sounds like by itself. And now I flipped the phase of this through the preamp when I tracked it so that they work together. But just for fun, I want to show you what it would sound like if we flip that phase back. So that's essentially what the mics would sound like if the bottom mic was not opposite the top in terms of its phase relationship. So, massive difference, right? And that's why that is absolutely crucial to this if you've never tried it before, you're not familiar with it. So, now the Y cable method allows you to do this through one preamp and then onto one track. And that's what that sounds like. Now I did balance these levels. So you notice on these I have these down minus 4.9 dB each because when combined they're about the same level as the Y cable method. I do think it sounds slightly different with the Y cable. It's a little tighter sounding to me. It almost tightens up the lower head, a little less floppy sounding. So what you're really hearing there in terms of the difference between the individual tracks and the Y cable method is actually the change in input impedance from microphones to the mic preamp input. Now I left these 1058s at their 1200 ohm setting just to take that out of the equation. I didn't change that at all for this test. Microphones, 421 has about a 200 ohm output impedance, 57 has about 150 ohm output. And you generally want to use the 10-to-1 rule, which is you want your input impedance of your mic preamp to be about 10 times higher than the output impedance of your mic. And that's for maximum sensitivity. That's not always perfect and it doesn't have to be. And you could find all sorts of room in there to play with, just like phase, you know, it doesn't have to be perfectly in phase. You could find a sweet spot somewhere along the way, you know. So when you combine, let's just for easy math say you're combining a pair of 421s, that actually drops the 200 ohm per mic combines to be about 100 ohm together. So yeah, that gives you a slight mismatch with your preamp input. And I'd say that's the biggest difference we're hearing. The Whirlwind Combiner box actually provides the same output. So if you've got a pair of 150 ohm mics going into it, you get 150 ohms out of it. And I think that's why the sound to me is just a little punchier and just a touch louder. And I think that's really the big difference. Let's compare this to just the Y cable. And I did not make any level adjustments here because I want you to hear that the level is slightly different. So that's the Whirlwind. Back to the Y. Whirlwind. So the Whirlwind is just a little bolder, a little punchier to me. Back to the Y. And I think this is because the Whirlwind corrects the impedance and the microphone preamps are seeing the proper impedance now. Because I think that's a passive box. I think it never actually opened it up, but I think it just has an impedance transformer in it and that's it. And the phase switch. So yeah, I thought this was pretty cool. Obviously the Y cable is a bit cheaper to do and it's used by Bob Rock, Randy Staub, Brendan O'Brien. So certainly nothing wrong with going that route. But I definitely like the way the Whirlwind sounds. So now, this is another Bob Rock technique, the Plywood under the floor tom. So let's listen to this. We're going to compare this with those same mics. These are both going through the Y cable with no plywood and plywood. So I think the plywood brings out the attack a little bit more. Shapes it just a little different. The resonance changes just slightly. And this is just a little square of plywood that you can kind of fit in between the legs of the drum. That way they're still on carpet, they're not gonna slide anywhere, but you're still getting the resonance of wood underneath the drum. I thought that was pretty cool. Now, let's listen to the 14-inch. First, let's listen to it, 14-inch, 421 on top, 57 on the bottom, Y cable. Just to get an idea of what that sounds like with the same mics we've been hearing. And now let's listen to the 609 and the 421 on the bottom. See, the 421 on the bottom adds more bottom to it. And the 609 on top definitely adds more attack. There is a little bit of a rattle on the drum that the 609 picked up more than the 421. You really don't hear it on the 421 track. And I recorded these mics simultaneously on the drum. So we could turn them on together. And that's all four at once. But I do think that with the 609 on top and the 421 on the bottom, it helps the voice of a smaller drum sound a little better. I think that's kind of cool. But then if we compare with the floor tom, this is the 609 on the top of the floor tom and the 421 on the bottom. It's almost too much bass with the 421 on the bottom. This is the one we've been hearing, 421 on top, 57 on the bottom. So I really think that it's the 609 on top of the 14-inch that sounds best on that drum, and then the 421 on the floor tom that really sounds best. So I totally get why Bob and Randy went that direction with them. Plus, in the context of a mix, it helps differentiate the drums a little bit more, or at least each pair of drums. Once more. 609 on top, 421 on the bottom of the 14-inch, compared to 421 and 57. It just places it a little more in your face, I feel like. Whereas for the floor toms, it just doesn't sound quite right for the floors. The 421-57 combination sounds way better on the 16. And these are all Y-cabled. I have all the little notes down here if you want to zoom in and check them out. Now we can talk about this cool little third mic that's added to the mix. This is the U195, in our case anyway. They used a U87 for it, so I tried to match their diagrams and videos. So, yeah, I had them give me a little Rain and Blood for that, and a little George of the Jungle. So you can hear it adds a whole lot to the sound. This is the U195 by itself, in between both drums. I did run the U195 through one of my API 312 preamps, by the way, just because I only have 2 of the 1058s. I'll turn it on and off while he's playing something consistent here. So I feel like it adds a heck of a lot to the sound. Let me actually let me loop that part. Hang on. That's without it. And then I played around with the phase a little bit. That's with the Little Labs bypassed. Still adds something, but then I just kind of you can hear the resonance change when I sweep the phase. Thought somewhere around there sounded best. The most meat, the best smack. And this is the kind of thing they would have had to do manually. They would have had to just go out and move the mic until it sounded best, which is, with probably a drum tech sitting there hitting it, because, Lars wasn't going to do that. But now, this was actually Drew's idea, because I was ready to pack up after that one, but he suggested that we do a pass of this with the plywood kind of in between the drums underneath where the U195 was pointed. And I thought that was a great idea, so that's our 3 mics, the same Little Labs phase setting. And let's A/B that a little bit. That's without plywood. With. Not bad, huh? Let's just A/B the U195. Without? With. And I think it sounds more interesting when you hear them all together. And just for full disclosure, I'm not doing really any EQing at all. I've got a tom bus. All these tracks are going through this tom stereo bus, where I'm using the Kiive case strip in API mode, because based on the notes, we know that the toms were submixed 2 tracks and they went through API 550B EQs. But I'm not doing anything here with the EQs. But this case strip does a great job of just sounding like an API. There's a little low-end boost just by going through it. I've got a little bit of SSL stereo compression. I'm going through an E channel version 2, again, doing nothing to it. Just whatever color that might be adding, just like a console would. And then the Studer is probably making the biggest difference here. And I love what it does. We know the drums went to tape, so I figured, why the hell not? And for reverb, I'm just using a little bit of Sound City Room. Not even really reverb, just a little bit of natural ambience, because my room really doesn't sound great, so I didn't even bother putting up a room mic for it. That's without Sound City. Just kind of fills in the space nicely. Anyway. I'm sure you've heard Georgia the Jungle enough for one lifetime in this video. So yeah, this was a lot of fun to try out some different things and just kind of see how it worked. And Drew and I had a blast doing it together, actually. So I think we're going to do more of these. In fact, there's a new set of load notes that came out on Metallica's website, and I've already picked up some new things from that. I'm going to make some corrections, you know, now that I could actually read them a bit more clearer. There's going to be another video on that, and there's some kick drum stuff in that I think we're trying to do. In fact, hey, if there's anybody out there in the New York City, New Jersey area with a 26-inch kick drum that we could use, hit me up. We might take you up on that. Biggest I could find is a 24, but we want to find a 26 to do some cool stuff with. But anyhow, please like, comment, subscribe, all that great stuff. Let me know what you think. I hope this was informative, and it sure was a hell of a lot of fun to do. All right, so until next time, take care, guys. Later.